One oddity that has been synonymous with Yakuza as of late was the strive for the brand to evolve. This isn't just referring to the games themselves, mind you, as RGG consistently switches things up to keep the games feeling fresh, but rather, the strive in question is also tied to the struggles born from the series' ever-changing namesake overseas. From just being called Yakuza, to Like a Dragon, to now incorporating both titles and blurring lines between the meaning of mainline games and spin-offs all the same, these strange naming shenanigans have become a fascinating point of interest for me. In part due to my love for the series, but also due to my formal background being in the field of economics. While RGG's marketing approaches have always been the stuff of legends, one would have to ask themselves why they keep going back and forth in trying to redefine their brand in the West. So, with that in mind, let's try to unravel what happened thus far and look for ways to potentially solve any inherent issues. Here's a question to start things off. Why would you want to do a rebrand in the first place? There's a multitude of reasons for this. For example, symbolizing a change from the old brand image to show your customers that you're evolving with time. Looking at Japanese properties in particular though, a rebrand early on in an IP's lifespan used to be a pretty common occurrence, since the use of different kana allowed a company to use a simple English name to label their product effectively and stand out on the Eastern market. However, such a naming convention might wind up feeling too generic in predominantly English-speaking markets, which can lead to certain series bearing different brand images overseas to combat that issue. For example, the horror series known as Zero in Japan was renamed Project Zero in Europe, and more notably, Fatal Frame in the US. Biohazard obviously became known as Resident Evil in the West, and along a similar train of thought, our beloved Ryuga Gotoku series took on the name of Yakuza. Now, looking at the naming alone, Yakuza in particular is as perfect of a choice as you could hope for. It's short, memorable, and when coupled with the imagery of the first game's cover art, paints a very clear picture of the property. Whether or not that image is fully representative of the final product is its own discussion, but looking at the Western brand from a marketing perspective, it's almost flawless. Now, seeing as the series exploded in popularity post the release of Yakuza 0 and grew even stronger in the West after Yakuza 7 dropped, this begs the question, why would you risk a brand's newfound recognition by altering its namesake this late in its lifespan? Well, my guess would be that RGG wanted to establish brand synergy in every market. Between the revised logos for the franchise, shared release dates, and now one-for-one promotional material, all of this paints a cohesive image of the series worldwide. It might take a while for customers to get used to this type of change, but calling the series Like a Dragon moving forward could have been what was best for the brand in the long run. Though, if one would go down that route, they'd have to stick to the new approach all the way, rather than flip-flopping between the old branding approach and the new one. And this is where a problem becomes apparent. The rebranding here originally started with an attempt of easing people into a new naming convention, seen in how Yakuza 7 was labeled Yakuza Like a Dragon in the West. This was then followed by 3 new games featuring only the Like a Dragon phrase in their titles, which made perfect sense. However, following this newly established trend, the Amazon Prime series started to prematurely break the cycle. This title was the beginning of retroactively reincorporating the Yakuza namesake in newer RGG products, which was followed by the release of Kiwami on the Switch being labeled as just Yakuza Kiwami, despite it being the first RGG release on a Nintendo system since the underperforming 1 and 2 HD for the Wii U. And after all of this, we had RGG themselves, now referred to the Kiryu Saga specifically as Yakuza games, and the Ichiban Saga as Like a Dragon games, which retroactively forced the Western branch of RGG to implement both names of the franchise in the case of a release like Majima Gaiden, or as it is officially known, Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. See how this could be confusing? Considering the trend taking shape after the first RGG Summit, the TV series could have been called Like a Dragon Beyond the Game, while the Switch port could have been called Like a Dragon Kiwami, seeing as they're both marketed as beginner-friendly entry points into the series for a brand new audience. The only reason for them to dial back this new approach would be if the lack of the Yakuza namesake in the branding was perceived to be the cause of lessened sales tied to a lack of brand recognition. But considering the record-breaking sales of a game like Infinite Wealth, that can't be the case. Mind you, none of this would be an issue in and of itself if it weren't coupled with a comparably strange decision, i.e., dropping the numbering from the games. Realistically, the idea of removing a number from a new product is frequently tied to a simple goal: presenting the game as an easy starting point for an eager consumer. However, the more common result is that this will cause confusion among people trying to play through the whole series, leading to them asking the community for an ideal playing order, which then leads to even more confusion due to the difference in opinions. Plus, while making a new game seem more appealing to casual consumers is good in concept, said consumers are rarely, if ever, the lifeblood of a brand. Loyal consumers are, as they purchase nearly every game in a franchise, even multiple copies of them, all the while informing people of ongoing sales and new products. A casual audience, on the other hand, will likely only try one of the games if it looks fun, without caring much about brand loyalty, especially should the discourse surrounding the canonicity of certain entries and blood split between mandatory and quote-unquote optional entries feel like too much of a hassle to comb through. I realize this sounds like I'm just dunking on the newest marketing choices, but it's not like the days before Yakuza 7 didn't have their own oddities to consider when comparing the branding approaches between different markets. Just look at the multitude of games that dropped their Japanese subtitles in the past. Yakuza 4 was also known as Successors of the Legend, 5 was known as Fulfiller of Dreams, and 0 was known as The Place of Oath, yet none of these namesakes were present in the Western releases of the games. Yakuza 6 was the only instance where the team tried to implement a similar namesake on both markets, a trend that was quickly stopped when Yakuza 7 opted out of using the Whereabouts of Light and Darkness subtitle and instead went for a hybrid title a la Resident Evil 7 did on release. So, looking at these past examples, the general thought pattern was likely the same as today, trying to present an entry in a direct and captivating manner. The only difference is that the older games were more consistent in their approaches, and still retained all of the crucial information in every market. The reason why I'm still hopping on about this is that the new approach to branding the games brings a dose of uncertainty into the process of purchase-based decision-making. Whenever I see a new Yakuza game released these days, there are dozens of comments shared by confused newcomers to the series who believe a game to be something that it's not, and thus base their initial view of it around that misconception. I've had so many people ask why I called Ishin Kiwami a Kiwami game because they didn't realize the game was a remake, due to it lacking the key word in its English name. Same thing happened with the newest entry that was revealed, where there were people claiming that this was a new mainline Yakuza game that disappointed them for its supposed lack of a serious tone, all the while disregarding that this was not a full-on mainline entry a la Infinite Wealth, but a Gaiden game, as was evident during the original reveal at the RGG Summit. Hell, back when Yakuza 7 released, a vocal minority thought that the game was actually a spin-off, due to featuring a brand new protagonist and drastically different combat system, and once they realized it was a proper mainline, this started a messy back and forth that persisted all the way up to launch. It might not be apparent if you're a longtime fan, but all of this back and forth switching is making the series feel less welcoming for a number of newcomers, the same audience for which these rebrand attempts have likely been intended. The point of rebranding is to label a product in a representative manner, and the more recent practices have sadly been a step back in that regard. For the sake of comparison, let's look at how Japan handled the naming of the newer entries. Aside from the updated logo for Infinite Wealth, that still featured elements of the classic logo, the namesake of the series has been Ryuga Gotoku since day one, with the appropriate numbering also being intact. Looking at the Gaiden games in particular, Kiryu's entry had the number 7 present in the namesake, denoting that this was a side story to Ryuga Gotoku 7, as the translation of the word Gaiden would also entail. Majima's pirate game followed the same logic, being a side story to Ryuga Gotoku 8, and both of these games could stick with having compelling subtitles afterwards because the first halves of their names were succinct and to the point. Keeping all of this in mind, let's say we were given the task of handling the naming conventions starting with the first Ichiban game in the West. How could we go about it? Honestly, I would have just stuck with the Yakuza name and the associated numbering. Considering that the brand received its two most notable popularity booms in the West, while it was predominantly advertised and identified as the Yakuza series, there was little reason to reinvent the wheel, as it were. As for the Gaiden games, if you wanted to make the game titles look as simplistic as possible, you could have just adapted a naming convention shown in light novel volumes. Say, calling the man who erased his name Yakuza 7.5 and the pirate game Yakuza 8.5. It implies that this is a shorter in-between experience between major entries, like 0.5 volumes are in light novel series and 0.5 chapters are in manga releases. After that, let the team's compelling marketing and the pre-established word of mouth do the rest of the work, as it has in the past and ultimately led to the previous popularity booms in the West. While brand synergy is something great to strive for, one should keep in mind that the same promotional strategy won't be equally successful in every single market. Hell, not even the community surrounding these games appreciates them in the exact same way, looking at the difference in opinions regarding games like Yakuza 6, or just looking at how different our respective meme cultures are. The same brand can have a different image depending on the environment where it finds itself, and that's to be expected of a strong artistic expression. Meaning that, strange as it may seem, sticking to what worked could have been the optimal choice in continuing a positive trend and letting a brand naturally gain further recognition. The question that remains is, what do we do right now? Do we go back to calling all of the games Yakuza all of a sudden, or do we keep both namesakes moving forward? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. As for me, the main reason why I made this video now of all times was due to the influx of confused newcomers trying to place the newer entries into a cohesive whole. For all I know, it might not be representative of the majority's views on the matter, but it all still felt like an interesting subject to cover regardless. So, out came this strange discussion piece. I hope you enjoyed it, and that you'll keep tabs on any upcoming news on this wonderful series, no matter what we may call it in the future. Either way, thank you for watching. So, until next time, take care of yourselves, and have a great day. Cheers!